Every storm will pass, and that is the moral of today's Foreign Fridays feature, the Wong Kar-Wai masterpiece, Chungking Express. I watched this movie 4 times and I can't believe how well it's aged. Every time you watch it, you will notice something different. So briefly, the film is set in Hong Kong and it follows the story of 2 nameless police officers who are jaded, paralyzed, all but hopeless because of a broken heart, and that is until fate steps in and resurrects their optimism for the future, proving that for better or worse, everything does happen for a reason. And despite narrating 2 completely different stories, the film does feel whole. Rather than connect them through reoccurring characters, the film relies on repetition and common motifs and themes to make the movie feel like one. Before I begin, there's an excellent commentary on the Criterion channel. So you can actually watch this movie with commentary in the background. And this commentary is by a film critic, and he goes through the setting, the actors, the directors, kind of what led up to this, like how this film kind of came to be. And it's an excellent commentary. So if you're interested in diving deep, it's definitely worth a watch. As an audience, it's not just what something looks like, it's also what something feels like. And this film is very chaotic, right? There's just a lot going on. But for some reason, you're able to follow it. And it all makes sense at the end. One of the film's central concerns is to analyze this uncertainty of human relationships. And I think that's why they don't give the 2 main officers names. They are just Officer 663 and Officer 223. And in a city like Hong Kong or any big city, you're basically just a number, right? You're just another person walking around. And these officers meet people out of convenience, right? And it just so happens that these people they meet change their lives for the better. It's hard enough to connect with the people that you interact with every day. And on top of that, people can come out of nowhere, right? People can truly surprise you. The uncertainty of human relationships is centered, there's 2 kind of points with this. The first is the uncertainty of how long such a relationship can last. You know, someone can love you today and they can be gone tomorrow. The other part of it is you don't really know who these relationships could be with, right? Like people come out of nowhere, people surprise you, and somehow this movie did a good job of articulating these 2 points. And you see it in this film, right? There's so much that divides all these characters, whether it be living in a big city, whether it be the clothes they wear, right? The officers, whether it be a uniform, work, right? The things that divide us, who's over the counter, who's ordering, who's being served in the case of Faye and Officer 663. And our environment can separate us as well. And you saw that in the second story with the flight attendant working up in the air and the officer, of course, working down in the ground. So at the start of the movie, Officer 223 is desperately calling his ex. He's waiting for a message, a sign, anything that will alleviate him of this loneliness. In comparison, Officer 663 is desperate, but he's not in denial. So the way these 2 men handle the heartbreak, you know, it's in total like opposite of one another. So in the case of Officer 663, he longs for the day that his flight attendant girlfriend will come back. So he keeps her things intact, he takes care of her stuff. And this is until, of course, he meets a young woman working at a food truck, and he starts to accept and come to the realization that this relationship that he had is really over. Both Officer 663 and 223 appear to have had very codependent relationships. Officer 223 is calling his ex. It seems like he had the type of relationship where he would always be calling his girlfriend, you know, checking in for the day, you know, just somebody to text. And it's really sad to say, but a lot of people don't even have one person to text. So having no one to text can be a bit depressing. In contrast, Officer 663, you know, his connection appeared largely physical. And one scene that he is living with his girlfriend, I don't think they said a word to one another. But I guess they didn't really need to. Just because you're physical with someone doesn't mean you're being intimate. It doesn't mean there's any connection actually being formed. And that's kind of the sad part of living in such a big city like Hong Kong. And both officers had more chemistry and more connection with these two women that they kind of interact with briefly than they did in these relationships that they were in. And the movie does such a great job of building chemistry between different characters, even before they meet, right? And again, it gets you thinking, like, are there really any like coincidences in life? Do things just happen? Or is everything kind of meant to be in its own kind of weird way? Both these officers kind of hold on to these empty symbols to feel better. So the first officer in the first story, it's his pager, right? He's holding on to this pager in case he gets a message, in case somebody checks in on him. And for the officer in the second story, he holds on, he finds meaning in every little thing that his girlfriend left in the apartment, right? It's actually quite sad to watch. In the case of Officer 663, Faye, the woman that he kind of comes to fall in love with, I guess you could say, at the end of the movie, starts to break into his apartment, and she starts to leave traces of herself in his flat, right? She starts to redecorate. She's swapping stuffed animals. She's doing all kinds of things in his flat. And these actions honestly mean more than any of the boxes or these items that this officer was trying to preserve in hopes that his girlfriend would one day come back. Just when they thought this feeling would not go away, it does. So in the case of Officer 223, it was a simple message, a simple happy birthday message. And in the case of Officer 663, it was a nap. And people have no idea how much a happy birthday or how are you or what's up can really do for someone. Their sense of self, their sense of confidence. And again, the fact that they live in such a big city is important because, you know, although you're surrounded by people, most of those people are totally alone. And you don't have to be deeply in love with someone or know them deeply for them to change your life for the better. I think that's what the film captures so well. As sad as it is, the only thing certain in life is change. And that's why relationships are just shrouded with uncertainty, right? People kind of come and go. People leave, people stay. Things can change overnight. Like what's true today doesn't have to be true tomorrow. And this is not true in just relationships, right? This is true in terms of the job you have, the place that you live. And both these officers at the start of their story, they're just paralyzed, right? They're waiting for their life to go back to normal. They're waiting for somebody to come back in so they can kind of continue this routine. And as their story unfolds, you realize a lot of the things they were doing was empty. They were just kind of going through the motions to like go through the motions. At the end of the film, they are able to kind of let go, right? They're able to let go and kind of move forward with a little bit more optimism. They go from romanticizing their past to romanticizing their future. And I think that's what this movie captures so well. Like at the end of the day, you know, life is about human relationships. And the sad thing about it is relationships can break us, but they can also put us back together again. And that's what you see in these two stories. I've divided my video into several parts. So if you want to know where this is going, just click the description box down below and you can kind of play around with it. I'll start with the setting, Hong Kong. And I thought Hong Kong was the perfect backdrop to tell the story of these two officers because it's a place that's ever changing. The Hong Kong we know today is virtually unrecognizable at the start of the film because it's set in a place called Chungking Mansions, which is filled with foreigners and the working class. So it feels a bit lawless, it feels a bit chaotic. And the first story in the film follows the coincidental encounter between a heartbroken police officer and a murderous drug mule. And this story takes place on the eve of Officer 223's birthday. So he is the young man that will be narrating this entire film. And on this night, all he can think about is his ex-girlfriend and how sad he is that he cannot talk to her. He's thinking about her while he's grieving, while he's begging for any type of contact. There's a mysterious woman in a trench coat, a wig, under incredible pressure to recover her drug mules before her boss notices that something is missing. The young man narrating this film, he switches between languages. right? He goes between Mandarin and Cantonese. And a lot of that has to do with the actor's background, which if you watch the commentary on the Criterion channel, unpacks really well. But initially, I thought it was really cool that the story was being narrated in different languages, because so much chaos going on in our heads that people actually knew what was going on. They wouldn't be able to decipher it anyways. And I think he's so heartbroken and he doesn't really have the language. So he just kind of keeps changing between languages to try and articulate what he feels, or maybe he's just out of words to describe his hurt in one language and he moves on to another language. Without his girlfriend, Officer 223 is kept company by his own thoughts. And one of the ways he measures his sorrow is through purchasing and consuming expired cans of pineapple, as if by consuming them, he can somehow keep some hope alive, right? That someday his girlfriend will come back. In one scene, he's going into this convenience store. He wants to buy these expired cans, and he kind of gets into this argument with the shopkeeper. And the shopkeeper is confused. He's like, why do you even care to buy these nearly expired cans of pineapple, right? Like, so many of them come in, you know, out with the old, in with the new. Like, why are you so pressed? And what he doesn't understand is Officer 223 feels like the old, and he feels used. He feels like he's about to expire, right? As soon as his birthday arrives, right? He's trying to pause time. And he kind of personifies these cans as if they have feelings, right? Like, how would you like it if, you know, nobody wanted to consume you before you expired, right? It's whether or not somebody wants you, everything must come to an end, right? Everything must expire. And in this case, it was his relationship. And this is the lesson that he has to learn at the end of the film. And so, trapped by his own thoughts, he consumes can after can of almost expired pineapple to make himself feel less lonely. And there's a stark difference between breaking up with someone and being broken up with, right? When someone leaves you, there's a feeling of dread, insecurity. So Officer 223, he feels replaced. He's suddenly aware of all the things he's lacking, all the things that he's not, that he fears he will like never become. And so he's desperate to get rid of this really depressing feeling. And so he chooses to almost in a second fall in love with the next woman he bumps into. Ironically, this woman just so happens to be a criminal and he's a cop. The woman in this first part of the story, this mysterious woman in the trench coat and the wig and the whole getup, she's at a crossroads in her life. And her drug mules escape, and she is nearly run out of town and killed. Like, she is under pressure. If she can't resolve this issue, you know, she's done, right? People are going to come after her, and she's in a very dicey situation. And her boss, that we seem to know very little about, appears to have this fetish for Asian women. Like, we get glimpses into this white guy at a bar, and he has this girlfriend, and she also has the same kind of wig. The longer we follow this woman in the trench coat around, this outfit, this very cool, iconic outfit, seems less like an outfit and more of a uniform that she wears, perhaps. And it's a uniform that she's unable to wear for much longer. And so Officer 223 and this mysterious woman first meet at a bar, right? And he can't believe her luck. You know, he doesn't even notice that he bumped into her earlier, right? He just sees her and he's like, perfect, I'm gonna fall in love with this woman. And looking at him, you can't really tell that he's a cop. And looking at her, you can't really tell that she's a criminal, right? So there's actually no barrier between the two, so they're able to come together and have this conversation. And the way this whole scene is shot, it's very dreamy, it's very soft, it's very warm. And I think when people romanticize their past, and because this is being narrated by Officer 223, I think this is true even for myself. Like, you kind of remember things better than they were, right? You remember your sorrow, you remember this, you feel like you lost something. So watching this whole movie and the scene in particular, it's almost like a memory. You know, it's like a very dreamlike sequence, right? Like something that, like, he's so sad, you know, and I felt like the way this movie was shot, did a good job of mirroring his sadness. So Officer 223 tries his best to figure out this woman's love language. You know, he's speaking multiple languages. I thought that was so clever to try and get her to talk to him. And of course, it's all pointless. She doesn't want to talk to him. You know, she has a lot going on at the moment. This woman gets so annoyed with this officer's presence that she kind of breaks his heart even more. She tells him that getting to know people is totally pointless because people change, and as a result, so does their love for you. And of course, that's the last thing this man needs to hear. And he kind of takes it as like, okay, great. Another person that wants nothing to do with me, another person that doesn't want to spend any time with me, great. Like, maybe I'm just loveless and maybe I should just accept that. And he decides in that moment that beggars cannot be choosers. And he kind of settles for what he can get, which is, in this case, is her company. He can't really bear this being alone anymore, waiting for this voice note or messages to come through. So he's like, you know what? I'm just gonna hang out with you because that's all I have. And I find it so interesting that when we're heartbroken or we're so sad, we're so naturally self-centered, right? Like the whole world kind of revolves around us. You know, when we're in pain, we don't really care what's going on around us. And so this guy, he's so sad, and little does he know that this woman is exhausted because she's on the run or about to be on the run. Like, she has a lot on her mind and she does not want to talk to this man. And so he spends the night kind of watching over her, ordering room service, just kind of like, he doesn't know what to do with himself. Before he leaves, he removes her shoes, cleans them, and places them neatly back next to the bed. And I think it was a way of thanking her for her company, and also a testament for all the small things that people do for us that we never get a chance to say thank you for. So this hotel room was, you know, it was a really intimate scene. They never talk, they never interact, he never tries anything, but they both kind of get what they needed, right? She gets some rest, and he gets some much needed company. And I think he was very thankful for that. And that's something this woman realizes after he leaves. So the next morning, he decides to go for a jog. And the logic being that sweating somehow curtails tears. So if you're able to jog, you know, the sweat will basically stop you from crying. I thought that was a very original way of looking at things. He's trying to distract himself, right? It's his birthday. He doesn't really want to think about that. And so the story ends with Officer 223 hanging up his pager, right? It's a very sad scene. He hangs up his pager, he's done. He's given all hope of someone, you know, calling him or any messages being left. And that's until it rings. You know, it rings for the first time. And the way he just ran back to see what that notification was about. And he comes to find out that he's received a birthday wish from this mysterious woman that he had met a few hours earlier. And the way that he was so grateful for this message, right? It kind of alleviated this cloud that was hanging over him, right? He starts to smile. And in that moment, you realize like he's going to be okay. Kind of ends his story by saying that, you know, he hopes that memories, unlike cans, will never expire. Or if they do, they won't expire for centuries. A weight is kind of lifted off both of them. Like, it's just insane what a simple birthday message or a simple, like, how are you, will kind of alter somebody's brain chemistry. He goes from feeling unlovable to just smiling ear to ear. So instead of fearing for the future and giving into circumstances and just letting the world take them in any which direction, they seem more confident, seem more hopeful by the end of their story. And you just get the sense that things are going to get better for them. There's no rule book to this, right? In the first story, like, despite the age difference, the profession, the life experience, they were still able to connect, right? They were still able to somehow come together and find some sort of comfort. And the way in which Officer 223 moves on suggests that it's not really like time that holds us back, right? Like, he could have been grieving over his girlfriend for months, years, right? It's our memories that hold us back. It's how we pedestalize these memories. So he kind of pedestalized his ex, and the minute he's able to move on and see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, he's able to kind of let go a little bit. And again, the way this movie, like, everything must come to an end, and it's not really the ending, it's like how we react to it, right? That kind of determines whether or not you move forward to a brighter future or one that's much worse, the present situation that you're in. We never meet these two characters again. They're gone. And the first time you're watching this movie, you're kind of wondering how these two stories will connect or kind of come together in some way. And they do come together, just not in the way that you think they do. And one of the tools that this movie utilizes very well is music, and specifically like repetition of music. And there's one song, I think, in the whole film that's played in whole. And the rest of the songs that are played, only the chorus is the focus of the song. The first story, the main song, was Things in Life by Dan Brown. And the whole point of it is to basically, highlight or draw your attention to the fact that change is inevitable. And despite the good times and the bad, you have to believe in a future where things get better, not worse, right? Like, you can't control everything, but you can control your reaction to it. And this applies to the main character, and this also applies to Hong Kong itself, right? It's a place that's like changing and moving all the time. And in the second story, the main song is California Dreaming and What a Difference a Day Makes. And we're actually introduced to Faye through California Dreaming, working at her cousin's food truck. And so this is a character that appears to, at the start of the second half of the movie, just appears to be sleepwalking through life. She's clocking in and out, and she's kind of waiting for her life to start, right? So this song, California Dreaming, perfectly captures her mindset. Is just dreaming of a better future, and in the meantime she's just kind of going through the motions until that future comes, right? When it will be, she doesn't really know. And it's not until she meets Officer 663 and she's exposed to his flight attendant girlfriend that she starts to see a clear path, right? She starts to see a way in which she can initiate this future that she's dreaming about to start, right? Like, you can't wait forever. If you wait forever, nothing will ever happen. And this song, What a Difference a Day Makes, perfectly captures that, right? She sees the flight attendant uniform, she sees his girlfriend, and suddenly, almost like her brain chemistry gets rewired, right? She's like, maybe there's a way out of this. It might not be as complicated as I think it is. First, she starts off blasting California Dreaming, and then she ends the film blasting What a Difference a Day Makes. And the reason her song choice changes is because her outlook on life changes. So instead of waiting for a change to come, she initiates it, right? She starts to take active steps to try and make something happen. And this in turn causes Officer 663 to snap out of his depressive state and start over. He goes from being an officer to a food truck owner. And again, that uncertainty in terms of human relationships, it applies to everything. It applies to jobs, where you live, everything. To start, in the second story, we get a similar plot line about an officer, this time Officer 663, who is left paralyzed by his flight attendant girlfriend. And she kind of abruptly leaves him one day. He's brokenhearted. He doesn't know why she left him, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. We also meet a young woman named Faye. She's paralyzed, but not because of a broken heart, but because she's kind of in anticipation for her future, right? She is the definition of just clocking in and out. Like, she's there, like her body is there, but her soul is like somewhere else. And when they first meet, she's blasting California Dreaming. The logic being that it keeps her from thinking, right? It keeps her from being present in that food truck. For the breakup, it seems that Officer 663 was used to a certain routine. He went to work. He got some food for him and his girlfriend. He had his day all planned out. He was almost in autopilot. And what a difference a day makes, right? The only time we see Officer 663 with his flight attendant girlfriend is through this dreamy haze, and they don't really talk, right? They're just kind of all over each other. I think it's the only time in the film where the song plays from beginning to end, as if to say, like, this is kind of foreshadowing the beginning of the end. And I felt this song was so appropriate because what's true today doesn't have to be true tomorrow. The whole relationship, it's kind of, because he's narrating the story, maybe in his mind it looks passionate and it looks like two people who are really into each other. But again, he's kind of romanticizing it, right? Like, you can kind of get so used to something that when it's gone, it's hard to imagine something like better is waiting for you out there. And that's the situation he's in. You know, he's like, I had such a sweet setup. Like, who am I going to find to do these things with? And so he just pretends that he doesn't have to find anyone new, and maybe she will come back. And watching his sort of relationship with Faye develop throughout the film, like, he has more of a connection with this stranger behind the counter than he had with this flight attendant girlfriend, it seems like, right? Like, these moments when he's giving her a foot massage or he's napping next to her, I mean, it was more intimate than that kind of carnal time that he was spending with his ex. But when the breakup happens, Officer 663 is lost. He's totally lost. He goes through his routine as if he still has a girlfriend, right? He actually kind of loses his mind. He starts to console the things in his apartment, right? The stuffed animals, the soap, the towel. He keeps her uniform all pressed and clean. Like, he keeps her things intact, so she'll come back and be super grateful. Acts like if he doesn't do these things, she might not come back, right? Like, his ability to kind of keep her presence alive in his apartment will somehow keep their relationship alive. It's really funny to watch because, as far-fetched as it looks, I mean, when you're heartbroken, like, all kinds of things go through your head, right? Like, there's a scene where he's like, he doesn't really understand that someone has been breaking into his flat, and it's just water all over, and he goes, well, you know, if an apartment cries, you have to mop. Like, he personifies everything in the apartment, right, to make it seem like, to kind of mirror his sadness, because he doesn't really want to feel alone. And unlike the first officer in the first story, he doesn't keep his thoughts to himself, right? He's literally talking to the things in his apartment. He's kind of speaking his thoughts out loud, as if to kind of postpone. Again, he doesn't want to feel like he's alone. If he keeps talking, then maybe she'll come back. And so while he's waiting, while he's just kind of going through his day in autopilot, so many things are happening around him. He's too heartbroken and he's too delirious to really take notice of anything until the end of the film. And one of these things is Faye breaking into his apartment while he's not there. So before leaving him, Officer 663's girlfriend left him a key and a letter. And so Faye decides to keep the key and go over to his apartment. And, you know, they say when one door closes, another one opens, and Faye literally went ahead and fully opened another door into this man's life. Seeing, I think, Officer 663 every day, seeing his girlfriend, she starts to kind of see a way out of her menial routine. And a lot of the reason she kind of breaks into his apartment is to kind of do some research, I guess you could say. You know, kind of see what that would be like. And so she kind of makes it her business to figure out where Officer 663 is working. And when she's sure that he's not anywhere near his apartment or he's not going back, you know, she proceeds to break into his flat and alter everything. Changes the labels on his cans. She adds sleeping pills to his drinks. This poor officer doesn't think anything of it. He just thinks he's exhausted. He's so heartbroken that he thinks it's just a symptom of his heartbreak. To the point where he actually believes that his taste buds were altered because he's sad, right? Like, that's the thing. When you're heartbroken, you're not really in your right mind. So you tend to entertain things that rationally you probably wouldn't. Like, he doesn't even notice the stuffed animals being changed, right? Like, one minute he's talking to a giant white stuffed animal, the next minute he's talking to an orange one. And he's like, damn, like, you really let yourself go. And it's like, sir, somebody has been breaking into your flat. This officer he's totally passive, right? He's just kind of going through the motions, and Faye, an otherwise passive character, becomes very active. She becomes almost a mastermind, curating their encounters, making sure that there's no chance of her being caught. Eventually, Faye begins to mastermind so many of these coincidental encounters between herself and Officer 663 that I think his spidey senses start to tingle, and he kind of instinctively one day runs back to his flat, nearly catching her in the act selling fish. So when they're in his apartment, he gives her a foot massage, and there's nothing weird about it, right? He just wants to do something nice for her because he just wants to feel wanted. You know, it's the little things. Like, he doesn't have anybody to show any appreciation to, and Faye is like, I want to be appreciated. And they take this nap together, and the way the scene is shot is really sweet, because first they just kind of sleep, and then Officer 663 wakes up and he sees that she's asleep, And then rather than waking her up, he kind of sits next to her and takes a nap. All right, he doesn't bother to kick her out. He doesn't bother to wake her up. Instead, he's like, you know what? Let's just chill. And I think that's the moment where he was like, I think I'm ready to move on. And he's so tired that he doesn't really bother to question her about it, right? Instead, he invites her in. And this scene is so clever because you can tell that after they were done, he kind of understood why everything was weird. Like, he started to get out of his heartbreak, and he's like, oh my God, this woman has been breaking into my flat. And where is my key? The rational part of his brain starts to kick in after this encounter. She totally forgot that she left her CD at his flat. And again, I think his spidey senses, his police instinct started to kick in. He's like, wait a minute, I don't listen to this music, but you do. So he goes to her counter, he gives her back the CD, and we find a totally different Faye. She's no longer blasting California Dreaming. Instead, she's blasting What a Difference a Day Makes. And she seems less manic. She seems less kind of like in and out, right? She seems more present. She seems just more like grounded than when we first saw her at the start of her story. And so Officer 663 tells her that the song clearly doesn't suit her and she should, he gives her CD back. And he further kind of directly tells her that he wants to go on a date with her, and he gives her a time and location, right? He's done being passive. He takes control, and he's like, this is what I want. Here's the time. See you there. And before this date, you can kind of feel their connection. Again, the movie does such a good job of building their relationship before they don't even have a relationship, but you feel like they've been building one this entire time. And it's at this point in time, like all these little interactions that he's totally unaware of, that kind of snap him out of it, right? He goes back to his apartment, he packs up his ex's things, and he's ready to put that behind him, right? He's no longer romanticizing his past. He's no longer praying and hoping this girl comes back. Instead, he's packing that away, and he's making room for something new. He goes off, changes his clothes, and he's ready for this date with Faye. Okay, so sadly for Officer 663, Faye comes to the restaurant a bit early and decides, kind of while waiting for him, that she's done kind of California dreaming and she wants the California dream to become a reality. And I think that's the whole point of the second half of this film. You have two people longing for something, and once they make the decision to go after it, their lives change for the better. And instead of waiting for someone to compensate what they think they lack, they just decide to fill in the gaps themselves, right? Like, again, if you wait for people, you're going to be waiting forever. And so they decide, you know what, they're going to be the change that they want to see. Before leaving, Faye leaves Officer 663 a letter, which later we find out is a fake boarding pass. She leaves it with her cousin, and then her cousin drops it off to Officer 663, and he's sad. And watching him, it's interesting. He's heartbroken, but he's also not heartbroken, right? Like, he seems a lot lighter than when we first saw him. And so he's kind of contemplating what to do next. He goes to a convenience store and he bumps into his ex-girlfriend again. And watching this, there's no barriers between them, right? They're not in uniform. They're not in costume, right? They're just two people looking at each other for who they really are. And the thing with, there's a lot of things that divide people, whether it be costumes, whether it be jobs, whether it be location, but there's a lot of the things that sometimes bring people together are false positives, right? Like, he met her out of convenience and they stayed together out of convenience, right? It was her uniform that attracted him to her, and she kind of tells him at the end of the film, like, you look better in uniform. And that's what she was attracted to in him, but there was nothing deeper than that kind of surface connection. And I thought it was one of the most clever kind of scenes in the whole film. And you don't sense any animosity. He doesn't seem pressed or desperate. He's like, you know what? You do you, sis. Like, I'm done. And so the movie ends 1 year later, and we find out that Officer 663 is no longer an officer. He is a food truck owner, and he is preparing to open up his new business. And again, like, he goes from being an officer to a business owner. That's something that he probably never imagined. And he probably didn't imagine that he would be buying up the place that, he was eating at every day. When they first meet, like, his reaction to her is like, it's as if he saw a ghost. He's so happy. He doesn't know why he's happy. He's just really, like, glad to see her. And he tells her, you look better in uniform. like just to kind of tease her a bit. I think he was really happy for her. Really enjoyed watching the roles reversed, right? Like she's the customer and now he's behind the counter. So although they are divided still by this counter and the work that they do, there's some understanding, right? Like you get the sense that they probably understand each other more now than even though they weren't in contact this entire time. And so she explains to him that she actually did come to the restaurant and she did actually want to go on a date with him. But while she was waiting for him, she decided that she couldn't wait any longer, and decided to see if California was really, everything that she dreamed of. So she's working as a flight attendant. Seems like she's kind of in a rush, right? She wasn't really expecting to find him there, let alone owning the place. And so it's a bit awkward. She doesn't really know what to do with herself. And, she has a flight. He invites her to the opening. He doesn't, she feels a bit awkward. So just before she leaves, he shames her with this fake boarding pass that she left him, basically saying, would you allow anybody on a plane with it? She goes, that's cool. I can write you a new one. And she asks him, like, where do you want to go? And he's like, anywhere. That's kind of the point of the story, right? Like, at the end of the day, we are our own limitations. Like here you have an officer so rigid, so strict, and now he's like, yo, take me anywhere, right? His new normal kind of changed overnight. And just because something doesn't happen today doesn't mean it can't happen one day. Now, how you get there, in what order, in what direction, that's not really up to us. What's up to us is how we react to these things. And I think that's what the movie like captured so well. Like, it's not about distance, it's not about time, right? Like all these things are relative, but it's about how we kind of conceptualize these things, right? How we pedestalize these things in our minds that either paralyze us or give us the power to move forward. Like you can either romanticize your future or you can be held back by it, thinking that there's nothing better waiting for you on the other side. And so at the end of the film, you had two people that were just sleepwalking through life until they decided they no longer have to do that. And just like that, they've created a new normal for themselves. They're no longer the same people they were at the start of the story. And that's why this movie works on so many different levels. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.